The dust settled last. First, the shouting had ceased, then the hard slap of a hand on a donkey's flank, and finally, the grinding retreat of wagon wheels. Alara stood alone as the silence of the plains rushed in to reclaim the space her life had once occupied. The wind, a constant, indifferent presence, tugged at the loose threads of her shawl and whipped strands of hair across her face, stinging her eyes. She did not blink. Her gaze remained fixed on the dwindling shape of the wagon, a dark speck crawling toward the horizon until it was swallowed entirely by the vast, bruised sky. He was gone. Jebediah, the man who had pledged himself to her before God and their families, had bartered her away for a lame donkey and 2 sacks of seed corn. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold stone in her belly, heavier than any hunger she had ever known. She could still feel the grit of the man's hand on her arm, the one who now owned the donkey. He had looked her over like livestock, his eyes lingering with a possessive gleam that promised a different, more intimate kind of cruelty than Jebediah's casual neglect. He'd told her to wait, that he'd be back for her by nightfall after settling his accounts in the dusty crossroads town. Wait, as if she were a parcel left on a porch. The world around her was a canvas of muted browns and bleached-out yellows. The sun beat down, relentless, leaching the color from the landscape and from her spirit. There was nowhere to go. To the east lay the town that had witnessed her shame. To the west, an endless expanse of prairie that promised only thirst and a slow death. Despair was not a wave that crashed over her, but a slow tide, rising inexorably, filling her lungs until she could not draw a proper breath. It was in this suffocating stillness that she first registered his presence. A shadow detaching itself from the shimmering heat haze near a low bluff. A man on a horse. He moved with a languid purpose that made the hairs on her neck stand on end. Another threat. Another man to measure her worth in labor or flesh. She braced herself, her hands clenching into fists inside the worn pockets of her dress. He stopped a respectful distance away, the leather of his saddle creaking in the profound quiet. He was lean, weathered by the sun and wind into something as stark and enduring as the landscape itself. He wore his hat low, obscuring his eyes, but she felt his gaze upon her. Not hungry or appraising, but steady, watching. For a long time, neither of them moved. He was a statue carved from dust and patience. Finally, he dismounted, his movements economical and slow, as if not to startle a wild thing. He walked not toward her, but to his horse, unhooking a canteen from the saddle. He took a long drink, then stoppered it. He held it out, not a word, just the offer suspended in the air between them. The gesture was so simple, so devoid of demand, that it broke through the shell of her numbness. Her throat was a desert, her lips cracked and bleeding. To accept was to show weakness, to create a debt. To refuse was to court death. Her gaze flickered from the canteen to his shadowed face, searching for the trick, the price she would be expected to pay. She saw nothing but a grim sort of neutrality. Slowly, her feet obeyed a will deeper than her fear. She took a step, then another, the cracked earth crunching under her worn boots. Her hand trembled as she reached for the metal flask, its coolness a shock against her skin. She drank, the water tasting of tin and life itself. It was the first act of kindness she had been shown in so long. She had forgotten what it felt like. When she finished, she handed it back. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second. They were the color of slate, holding no judgment, only a deep, abiding quiet. He gestured with his head back the way he had come. "Storm's coming," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. It was not a command, but a statement of fact. Then he turned, swung himself back into the saddle, and began to walk his horse away, not looking back to see if she would follow. She had no choice. She was a ghost in a dead land, and he was the only living thing moving toward shelter. Alara trailed behind him, a small figure lost in the immensity of the plains, following a stranger toward an unknown horizon, the taste of water still on her lips. The place he called home was little more than a line shack, a small, stubborn structure clinging to the base of a rocky outcrop, braced against the ceaseless wind. It was built of sun-warped timber and sod, looking as if it had grown from the earth itself. There was a lean-to for his horse and a small, fenced-in corral. It was a lonely, austere existence. Yet as he dismounted and began to unsaddle his horse, Alara felt the first flicker of something other than terror. The shack, for all its poverty, possessed a sense of order. Tools were hung in their proper place. The woodpile was neatly stacked. This was not the chaotic squalor of Jebediah's life. Silas. He had offered his name as curtly as he'd offered the water, moved with a quiet efficiency. He never told her what to do. He simply went about his tasks, and she, adrift and purposeless, found herself observing his rhythms. He drew water from a deep, stone-lined well, hauled it inside, and set a bucket near the dry sink. He lit the small cast-iron stove, and soon the scent of coffee and wood smoke filled the single room, a welcome defense against the growing chill of the evening. Alara stood awkwardly by the door, a specter in her own life, unsure of her place. She was property, traded and awaiting collection. Was she now this man's property, too? The thought sent a cold shiver through her. But he did not look at her with ownership. He hardly looked at her at all. He poured 2 cups of coffee into tin mugs and placed one on the rough-hewn table. He sat, gesturing to the other chair. She hesitated, then took the seat opposite him. The silence between them was vast, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rising moan of the wind outside. He ate jerky and a piece of hardtack, pushing a share across the table to her. She ate because her body demanded it, the food tasteless in her mouth. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who was this man? Why was he helping her? What would he expect when the man, Thorn, came to claim her? Every nerve was taut, waiting for the demand, the look, the gesture that would reveal his true intentions. But it never came. He finished his meal, took his mug to the sink, and went back outside to secure the animals against the coming storm. Left alone, Alara looked around the small cabin. It was a man's space, sparse and functional. A single cot, a shelf with a few worn books, a rifle mounted on the wall. Yet, in one corner, on a small crate, sat a cluster of polished stones, their colors muted but beautiful, arranged with a deliberate care that seemed at odds with the harshness of the surroundings. She ran a finger over a small, chipped plate. It was clean. Everything was clean. Jebediah's home had been a place of filth and decay, a reflection of his soul. This was different. This was a place of solitude, not neglect. When Silas returned, stamping the dust from his boots, he did not approach her. He laid a few spare blankets on the floor near the stove, a clear distance from his own cot. "You can take the floor," he said, his back to her. "It's warmer there, and that was it." He lay down on his cot, fully clothed save for his boots and hat, and turned his face to the wall. The storm broke then, the wind howling like a hungry wolf and rain lashing against the roof. Alara lay wrapped in the rough wool blankets, listening to the tempest outside and the steady breathing of the man across the room. For the first time in days, she felt a measure of safety. It was a fragile, conditional thing, wholly dependent on the character of a man she did not know. Yet, as she stared into the flickering firelight, she felt a strange calm settle over her. He had offered her water, food, and shelter. He had offered her the warmth of his fire, and he had asked for nothing. In a world that had taken everything from her, this simple absence of demand was a gift more profound than any she had ever received. Days bled into a week, then 2. A quiet, unspoken routine took root in the small cabin. Thorn did not come. Every sunrise, Alara expected to see his hulking figure on the horizon. But each day brought only the vast, empty sky. The fear remained, a low hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. But it was no longer all-consuming. It made space for other things. She began to contribute, not from instruction, but from a deep-seated need to reclaim some part of herself. She started by sweeping the floor, the simple, repetitive motion a comfort. Then she washed their few dishes, tended to the small herb patch she found behind the shack, and mended a tear in his shirt while he was out checking his fence lines. She left the folded shirt on his cot, and when he returned, he merely glanced at it, then gave her a brief, almost imperceptible nod. Words remained scarce, but a different language grew between them. It was in the way he left the heaviest water bucket just inside the door for her, and the way she made sure there was always hot coffee ready when he came in from the cold. She learned to read the set of his shoulders, to know when the day had been hard. He, in turn, seemed to understand her need for silence, for space. He never intruded on her thoughts, never asked about Jebediah or the life she had left behind. He treated her past as a closed door, respecting her enough not to try the handle. One afternoon, while mending a bridle in the sliver of shade by the lean-to, she watched him with one of his horses. The animal had been skittish, but Silas spoke to it in a low, calming murmur, his hands gentle but firm as he checked its hoof. He possessed a patience with the animal that was absolute. He did not seek to break its will, but to earn its trust. It was then that Alara understood. He saw her not as a broken creature to be tamed, but as a person who had been wronged, deserving of the same quiet respect he offered his horse. The realization was a profound shift within her. Her fear of him began to recede, replaced by a tentative, fragile trust. She started to see the beauty in their stark world. The way the setting sun set the bluffs on fire, the resilience of the wildflowers pushing through the hard-packed earth, the clarity of the stars in the night sky, undiluted by any other light. One evening, the tension that had held her spine rigid for so long finally eased. He was cleaning his rifle by the fire, the metallic clicks precise and rhythmic. She was kneading dough for the next day's bread, her hands covered in flour. "My father taught me to track," he said, his voice startling her in the quiet. He didn't look up from his work. "Said you can learn more from what a thing does than what it says." She stopped kneading, her hands still in the dough. She understood he was not just talking about animals. He was telling her that he had been watching her, that he had seen her quiet efforts, her resilience. "My mother," she replied, her own voice husky from disuse, "taught me that a home is not the roof over your head, but the hands that build it." His fingers stilled on the rifle. He looked up, and his slate-gray eyes met hers across the firelight. For the first time, she did not flinch from his gaze. In that shared look, an entire conversation passed between them, one of mutual recognition, of shared hardship and survival. The trust that had been a seedling was now a sapling, strong enough to withstand the wind. It was enough. For now it was everything. But just as the peace began to feel real, a rider appeared on the ridge. It was not a silhouette she recognized. It was Thorn. He had come to collect his property. The man rode into the yard with an air of arrogant ownership. His horse trampling the small patch of herbs Alara had been tending. Thorn was as she remembered, barrel-chested and florid, with small, mean eyes that took in the scene with a smug satisfaction. He swung down from his saddle, his gaze dismissing Silas as little more than a squatter before landing on Alara with a possessive leer. "There you are," he boomed, his voice slick with false bonhomie. "Got tied up with business. Hope this fella's kept you warm for me." Alara froze, the wooden bowl of beans slipping from her grasp and clattering onto the packed earth. The old fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fragile peace she had built. She felt like an object again, a piece of luggage to be claimed. Silas rose slowly from the bench where he had been oiling a harness. He moved without haste, placing himself between Alara and the newcomer. He was leaner than Thorn, less physically imposing, but he stood with the rooted stillness of an old oak. "She's not going anywhere," Silas said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet it carried more weight than Thorn's bluster. Thorn chuckled, a foul, guttural sound. "That ain't your decision to make. I made a deal with her husband. She's mine. Paid for her with a fine donkey. I did." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice near Silas's boots. "The donkey's lame," Silas stated simply. Thorn's face darkened. "That's between me and Jebediah. Has nothing to do with you. Now step aside before you get hurt." He reached for the pistol at his hip. Silas did not move. He did not even glance at the weapon. His eyes remained fixed on Thorn's. "A lame deal's no deal at all," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you're on my land for a moment." The world seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the restless stamping of Thorn's horse and the ever-present wind whistling around the corners of the shack. Alara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw the calculation in Thorn's eyes, the weighing of risk against reward. He was a bully, accustomed to his physical presence being enough to get his way. Silas's unyielding calm was something he didn't understand, and it unnerved him. But it was not Silas's defiance that changed the course of the confrontation. It was Alara's. A fire, long dormant, ignited within her. It was the fire of every humiliation, every moment of being treated as less than human. She had been bartered, abandoned, and threatened. She had survived. She would not be a prize to be fought over. She stepped out from behind Silas, her chin held high. Her voice, when it came, did not tremble. It was cold and clear as well water. "I am not a sack of corn, Mr. Thorn," she said, looking him directly in the eye. "And I am not yours." The declaration hung in the air, simple and absolute. It was the first time she had truly claimed herself, her own existence. Thorn stared at her, momentarily stunned by her audacity. He looked from her defiant face to Silas's implacable one. He saw not a man defending his property, but two people standing together. Partnership. He was outnumbered in a way that had nothing to do with weapons. With a final, frustrated curse, Thorn wrenched his horse's head around. "You'll regret this," he snarled. A petty threat from a man who knew he had lost. "Both of you." He spurred his horse mercilessly, galloping away in a cloud of dust and resentment, leaving behind a profound silence. The immediate danger was gone. Alara stood watching him go, her body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. She had not been rescued. She had stood her ground. Silas turned to her. He reached out not to touch her, but to retrieve the fallen bowl. He brushed the dirt from it with his thumb, his movements deliberate. He looked at her, and in his slate-gray eyes, there was a warmth she had never seen before. It was not pity. It was respect. He held the empty bowl out to her, and when she took it, their fingers brushed. The brief touch was an anchor in a world that had, just for a moment, tilted back onto its axis. That evening, the air in the cabin was different. The shared threat had burned away the last vestiges of suspicion, leaving behind a clean, quiet space between them. They sat by the fire, the silence no longer a void to be endured, but a comfortable blanket they shared. The storm had passed, both outside and within. Alara felt a sense of lightness she hadn't known was possible. The weight of being someone else's property lifted from her shoulders for good. She was simply Alara. Here. Alive. Silas finally broke the quiet, his gaze on the dancing flames. "My wife," he began, and the word hung in the air, heavy with a history she had never dared to ask about. "She died. Fever. The winter after we built this place." He spoke in short, clipped sentences, as if the words themselves were painful to excavate. "She loved the wildflowers on the bluffs. Said they were tougher than they looked." He paused, turning a small, smooth stone over in his palm, one of the polished rocks from the crate in the corner. He was not asking for sympathy. He was sharing a piece of his own brokenness, making a space for hers. He was showing her the man behind the stoic silence, the quiet grief that shaped his solitude. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. "She sounds like she was a good woman." "She was," he said, his voice thick with memory. He looked at Alara then, his expression open and vulnerable for the first time. "She would have liked you. You're tough, too." The compliment, so plain and unadorned, landed deep in Alara's soul. It was not about her appearance or her utility, but about her spirit. He saw her. He truly saw the strength she was only just beginning to recognize in herself. The world had tried to define her by her relationship to a man, as a wife, as a possession. But here, in this remote corner of the earth with this quiet cowboy, she was being defined by her own resilience. A home, she had told him, was not a roof but the hands that built it. She looked at her own hands, calloused now from work, and at his, resting on his knee. Together, without design or intention, they had begun to build something here. A sanctuary forged in mutual respect and shared silence. It was not love, not yet. It was something quieter, rarer. It was the beginning of trust. It was the promise of safety. Later, as she lay on her blankets by the fire, she no longer felt like a guest or a refugee. She felt she was a part of the grain of the place. The wind outside no longer sounded like a threat, but like a lullaby. The next morning, she rose before him. She stepped outside into the crisp, pre-dawn air. The sky to the east was a pale, hopeful gray, blushing with the first hint of rose. The land, which had once seemed so terrifying and empty, now held a stark and profound beauty. It was a clean slate. Silas emerged from the cabin, a tin mug of coffee in each hand. He wordlessly passed one to her. They stood side by side, not touching, and watched the sun breach the horizon, spilling liquid gold across the prairie. The light caught the strength in his profile and warmed her face. Her life had not been saved by him. He had simply given her the space to save herself. And in that space, something new and fragile and incredibly precious had been allowed to grow. She took a sip of the hot, bitter coffee, the warmth spreading through her chest, and for the first time since the donkey, she smiled.